Hey there, and welcome to the Girl Means Business podcast, the show that's all about helping photographers just like you build a thriving business without sacrificing your sanity. I'm your host, Kendra Swalls, a former teacher turned full-time photographer and marketing coach, here to fill your earbuds each week with practical tips, real-life stories, and a whole lot of encouragement. So if you're ready to dive in, let's get to it because this girl means business. Hey friend, welcome back to the Girl Means Business podcast. Now, last week at the end of the episode, I put out a call reminding everyone that I have the Ask Me Anything form down in the show notes here on every episode. And I said, send me your burning business questions. And let me tell you, you did not disappoint. So I'm excited because in several coming episodes, I will be addressing your questions. But I had one in particular that I felt like I've addressed this with some of my coaching clients in the past. I have addressed this in some Facebook group questions. And so I feel like it's something that a lot of you may be struggling with, and I wanted to talk about it. The question I received was around the idea of what do you do and how do you manage content if you focus on more than one thing? So the example she gave was, I really love photographing families, but I also like doing brand sessions. And her ideal client is a small business owner who also has a young family. And so she was like, I feel like that it's the same ideal client, which I love because she was addressing the ideal client episode we talked about previously. But she's like, I also get confused and feel conflicted in how to put out content that appeals to my ideal client. So in this case, it's actually a lot easier than you might think because her ideal client is the same person. It's one and the same. She's a business owner, but she also has a young family. Now, because I vaguely know the person that sent in this question, I happen to know a little bit about her. And I know that she is also a small business owner. She owns a photography business and she has a family of her own with young children or youngish, school age children. And so in this case, her ideal client is the same position that she's in. So in that case, my advice back would be, you can talk about all these things in your content because ultimately you want your content to appeal to your ideal client. So you can talk about the fact that, like, let's say on your website, you can say, being a business owner and a busy mom is a lot to handle. Let me help take photography off of your plate or whatever. That's a very off the wall tagline, but you get the point of, like, speak directly to her that she is a business owner / mom. Those two things together is a lot that you're juggling at one time. So the fact that she can have one photographer to help her not only get imagery for her business, but also be a great family photographer that her family can grow with from year to year is an incredible concept. So your content, as far as what you put out on your blog, your social media, needs to speak to those things too. So maybe you create a blog post where you're talking about like 5 tips for balancing business and babies. And, you can give some tips on how to like handle trying to maybe work from home as the business owner while still paying attention to your family, how to have boundaries around a start time and an end time to your work day. And then, filter include some of your photos that you've taken for clients that are both business owners and moms. And so that's one of the great ways that you can kind of fuse the two together if your ideal client is the same for both. Now, what do you do if you have kind of 2 separate ideal clients? So let's do an example here. Let's say that you are a photographer who you really love doing newborns and maternity, but you also really love doing boudoir sessions. Those 2 things don't necessarily overlap. I mean, they can. I guess the boudoir session could lead to the baby bump at some point, but ultimately you're probably going to be targeting people in 2 very different phases of their life. And it could be that you're targeting your boudoir for, more of the bride. Or in this case, I'm going to say, let's say you're targeting the boudoir towards like moms or towards women who are like what I do, and it's in their later phase of life. Their kids are more independent. They're getting back to who they are as a person. So ultimately, you are targeting women, but in different phases of their life. So how do you best accomplish this? Well, you can go the route of having everything kind of in one place. I've seen people do this. Some of them do it well, where someone can come to your website and you primarily, advertise what you do, but then you kind of have this like little extra piece where you talk about like the boudoir section of things. Some people have where they have the little landing page and it's like you choose your own adventure sort of idea of, do you want to go maternity, newborn, or boudoir? Then they kind of choose the path they want to go down. And that way they're sort of saying, this is what I'm interested in. Or you can have them completely separate. Now, if you separate them out, just know that requires a little bit more effort and work on your part, because you now have to run them as basically two separate brands. So if you honestly have two parts of your business that you feel like do not overlap in a whole lot of ways, or if they do, it's very, very minimal, then I would say you have to make that decision of, do I want these to be two completely separate things, or do I want one to be kind of a subsidiary of the other one? So in the case of the example with the newborn and the boudoir, if newborns is your primary, then that needs to be the focus of everything you're putting out. But then you can sprinkle in these ideas of like, oh, by the way, I also do this. I also have this sort of sub brand that is the boudoir side of things. I see a lot of wedding photographers will do that with weddings and boudoir, is they will primarily focus on the weddings aspect of their business, but then they will advertise from time to time the boudoir piece. Or they'll have like a little like kind of secret, I say quote, secret section of their website where they can go and view more information about boudoir sessions. So that's an option. Now, how do you put out content like on social media? Well, social media, oh, it's such a beast. I really hate social media, but it is the necessary evil in some cases. So if you are wanting to really put a lot of your energy and effort into marketing on social media, then I would say you need to have two separate accounts. So in the case of, the babies and boudoir, it would be two separate things. Ideally. Now, if you're like, I can't handle that, it's not possible for me, then again, same thing with like your website and all that kind of stuff. You need to pick a primary one. And here's the main reason why, is because when someone goes on to Instagram and they do a search, and let's say you're in Charlotte, North Carolina. So if they put in Charlotte, North Carolina, newborn photographer, then you want your content and you want your profile to show up under that search. And the way that it does that is if you have those keywords in your bio, in your title, in your content. If your title just says Charlotte, North Carolina photographer, you're going to be pushed down pretty far down the list because you don't match the specific criteria. Or if it says something, frilly like Charlotte, North Carolina bumps to babies in boudoir, you might come up in a boudoir search. A lot of times clients don't even know how to spell boudoir, much less know to search for it. But babies, I don't know, it wouldn't necessarily show up. So for SEO and searchability purposes, you really need to be specific in the keywords you're putting in your bio and in your content. And if you have two very different clients that you're trying to reach, if you have two very different genres you're trying to focus on, it's going to be hard to have that really honed in searchability because your content and your keywords are going to be kind of all over the place. So that would be one of my main reasons for wanting to keep them separate. You can make it work. You absolutely can. And you could have it focused on, like I said, newborn photography. And then every once in a while, sprinkle in things like, hey, did you also know that I offer these types of sessions? Check out, go to this, go to the link. You can have multiple links in your bio. So put a link in there for it. Go to the link in the bio and check out my boudoir page, or my boudoir section of the website. So there are ways you can do it. Ultimately, I would say if you are struggling with this idea of I have two separate aspects of my business and I don't know how to make them merge, look for crossover. So look for areas and ways that you can have the two aspects of your business intersect. So for example, where I talked about the client or the photographer who maybe does, newborns and boudoir, you can find a way to cross those over. Those are both women. They are maybe both moms. Or they're, if you're wanting to focus more on brides, then maybe it is like the bride who now wants to start a family, and you can find ways to intersect those. You can have fun with it if you want to. Like you could say like, hey, boudoir leads to babies. So call me the next time, when you're ready to book your newborn session. Have fun with it. If that is part of your personality, definitely have fun with it. Now, if you find yourself in the situation where you're like, okay, I have two parts of my business. I have two separate ideal clients and I cannot find a way that they intersect, then you need to have two separate brands ultimately. Like that, there's just, unfortunately, that is the reality of it, is that if they are so far apart, if you're like, I do photography, but I also make clay bowls that I sell at markets. Well, those are two totally different, audiences. There's not a whole lot of ways for those two to intersect. And you can always cross promote some to some degree, collab with, with yourself and your other side of your business. But there, if you want it to really flow nicely, they have to have some crossover. Now, here's the other part about social media. When you are building a social media presence, I'll just use my own as an example. I have my photography business, Paisley Lane Photography. I have an Instagram account for that. Then I have my coaching business, Girl Means Business. I have a separate account for that. The reason I ultimately decided to separate them, because you might be thinking, but Kendra, they both have to do with photography because you're coaching photographers. You're doing photography. Why couldn't you keep them all in one? And I see this a lot with photographers who enter into kind of the education space where they're like, well, I do photography. I'm a family photographer, but I now sell presets, or I teach courses, or, I want to do coaching, or I want to speak at events. The problem with combining all of those things, and if you're just doing the education side is like a very minor part of it, then that's fine. But if you're wanting to build it up and really grow it into its own brand, it needs to be separate. So for example, on my photography page, I do have some photographers that follow me. That's inevitable. If you're doing photography, you're going to have other photographers that will follow you, and that's fine. But ultimately, that's not who I want following me, because that's not the ones that are necessarily going to be my ideal client. Now, some of them might hire me to do their own photos, but ultimately, I want actual potential clients following me. So if my Instagram account for Paisley and Photography, and I'm now marketing coaching and whatever else, courses and presets and all the things, I'm going to end up getting more photographers following me, and it's going to throw off the whole algorithm of my page, because now Instagram's going to be like, well, I don't really know who to show your content to, because I was showing it to these women that I thought might want to hire you as a photographer, but now all these other photographers are coming in and showing interest in your content and liking and commenting, sharing all the things. Who do I show your content to? So less of my actual audience for my photography is going to see my content, and probably less photographers are going to see my content because I've confused the algorithm. So if you are trying to attract too many people to your page, you are confusing the algorithm, and they don't really know who to show your content to. So for that reason, it was better for me to separate the two out, because then the algorithm knew, okay, if I'm posting content on the Girl Means Business page, I want it to be shown to small business owners, photographers, those people. If I'm posting content on my photography page, I want it shown to women in the Dallas-Fort Worth area where I live, where I do my sessions, who want these types of sessions. And so by separating those out, I was able to be more specific in my content. I didn't have to worry about confusing the audience or confusing the algorithm. Now, if I was doing similar things like the first example, which was the photographer asking the question of, okay, I do family sessions, but I also do branding sessions, and I want to do branding sessions for moms of young children. That you could easily target on one page. You're not going to confuse the audience a whole lot because a lot of small business owners are moms and they do have families. And you can still target them in a specific area because you are still trying to attract clients in your area for both of those things. And so when it comes to social media, you not only to think about like, well, can I just post every other thing? Like one post is about this and one post is about that. It's not just about your post and about your content. It's also about like, you want your content seen by the right people, and the content you're feeding and the context of your content that you're feeding into the algorithm is going to ultimately decide who sees that content. And so I have a lot of photographers who will come into coaching sessions and they'll be like, I mean, I've been posting all the time on social media, but I'm getting all of these like random people that aren't my ideal client. Well, it's because for a long time, they've confused the algorithm about who their content is for. So when it comes to this idea of like, okay, I do multiple things, either you have to A, find a common ground and focus on that, or B, you need to separate the two out. And that was a long, like 17-minute rant to get there, but that's where we're getting at is that, and like I've said a million times, it's not what I tell you to do, it's whatever's best for you. If you're listening to this and you're like, okay, that's great, I've been needing clarification, I'm going to separate my two things. I'm going to have a newborn page and I'm going to have a boudoir page, or I'm going to have a photography page and I'm going to have an education page. Great. Go do it if you think you can do that. If you're listening to this and you're like, I cannot possibly add one more account to focus on in my life without losing my Avra love and mind, then don't do it. And find a way to either just focus on one on Instagram and put everything else somewhere else. Maybe your Instagram is this and your Facebook is this and your website is this. You have to do what works for you. Okay. I can sit here all day long and I can preach to you on a microphone and I can tell you exactly what has worked for me, what has worked for other clients I've worked with. But even what's worked for me doesn't always work for my clients, which is why when I do coaching, I always tell people, I'm like, it's not a one size fits all system. You're not going to come into this coaching session being told do X, Y, and Z because that's what worked for me. I'm going to tell you do QRSTUV. I'm just going to start saying letters. I'm going to tell you to do, these things because that's what's going to work for you and who you are and your life and your personality and the time that you have available and all the different variables that go into your life and your business. So I know that feels like kind of a cop out to answering the question. It's not. I want you to understand that you have options. You have to choose the option that is best for you and what you are capable of being consistent at. All right, wrapping things up. If you have questions around this or anything else in your business, head down to the show notes to the, burning business questions section and fill out that form. Send me a question. Let me know what it is that you are struggling with or what you have or need help with or have questions on. I am happy to address those in a future podcast episode. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. I hope you learned something valuable from it. And I will see you back here next week for next week's episode. Same time, same place.